before you can start helping out other people, maybe fix your own problems first, and then why are we
Yeah.
expanding? Why are we trying to bring in more people to join? This all feels a bit more just it just feels more
Yeah.
like it's more like geopolitical
Like
posturing.
expansionism.
Yeah,
If you can't fix your own countries, bring in another country would not make it better. It's just going to make it worse. Like it's
it
proven
doesn't
that
help.
the EU cannot manage people or situations or anything.
This is ENDtv.
Yeah.
It is the whole EU Ukraine membership. The EU obviously is a union of different countries who all share a common economy or market, and then they introduced a
They've
common
got
currency.
like countries can trade like among each other,
Yeah,
like without borders.
and you can freely travel. And now it's more of a politicized union because now there's a central kind of government for it in Brussels, in Belgium, and yeah, there's a bit of consternation with this. This is why Brexit occurred, because there were people who were
Yeah,
upset in relation to like choices and policies being made from unelected officials or people that weren't really directly
exactly.
connected to the locals or the national people of the UK.
It's quite
Um,
concerning.
yeah,
On the one hand, we have like countries supposedly running themselves. On the other, we have like EU laws, which
mhm,
supposedly are above the country's laws. And
like
sometimes they
federal. Yeah,
conflict and don't follow each other. But then, if the EU laws are above the country, sometimes the stuff coming from the EU is from people who are unelected, then
yeah.
what the fuck is going on? like,
I mean,
like, are you
that's
serious? What kind of democracy is this? Democracy is like voting for your leaders. Like, this is
true.
not fair.
One thing to know is that there is like you can national countries can vote for their representatives to or which parties to represent them in the European Parliament. So we're not talking about
Okay, yeah,
those people not being unelected, but we're talking about the other bodies within the European Commission and the
yeah.
presidents who are kind of not. Uh, no one really votes for them, like you, me, no
Mm.
one
Like
across
the
the
EU
board.
chief, right?
Yeah, like
Ursula
like
von
Queen
der Leyen.
Ursula. Oh God, yeah. I'm just so used to saying Queen Ursula now because of Little Mermaid. Um,
So,
but yeah, what people don't know is that every now and then there's new countries that are put in sort of line to register or to accession to join the EU. Because, ironically enough, whereas in the West we're pointing fingers of people being expansionist, well, the EU is expansionist. So
like
they're always,
geographically,
yeah,
politically, for
yeah.
war, for like militarily, everything.
I mean, at the moment, yes, militarily, because they're developing the whole military industry, and actually, that's been spiking in terms of economy news. That means their markets are doing a bit better because of industry, manufacturing, and stuff. Lo and behold, but anyway, yes, they're considering Ukraine because Ukraine was granted EU candidate status on the 23rd of June. This was back in 2022, and the accession negotiations officially began on the 25th of June 2024 of last. So this was last year in Luxembourg, alongside with Moldova, the little known country which is next to
Hmm.
Romania. So the EU and Ukraine are currently in this bilateral screening process, and it's expected to continue through the autumn of this year. And reportedly, Ukraine has already achieved 100% alignment with EU foreign security and defense policy as of March 2025. However, there has been a bit of a hiccup. That's what we're going to get into because that's what this all sort of like coincides with. And of course, there have been recent. This is what this is what has been in the headlines recently because there's been recent challenges and political backlash. So in July of this year, Ukraine's president sought to place its anti-corruption watchdogs, which were NABU and SAPO, under the prosecutor general's control. That means they would basically have a total monopoly over what was going on, which is kind of weird because as anti-corruption you should have independent third parties, like that are not non-affiliated, right? So this sparked mass protests and international concern. It threatened key EU membership criteria tied to the judicial independence and rule of law. We had reported, I think, about last week or so, that there was a new report that came out, was the new law report from the EU, where they were challenging anything to do with corruption and so forth. So there were new standards set. This coincides with it.
Hmm.
In response, the Ukrainian parliament swiftly reversed the changes, and new legislation restored these agencies' autonomy, which, of course, EU officials welcomed, though they warned of lasting political damage to the Ukraine's EU bid. So, EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has reaffirmed Ukraine can still rely on EU support, but emphasized the importance of preserving democratic institutions. All 27 EU member states must unanimously agree, however, for the advance accession negotiations to go any further. Hungary's has been a staunch, kind of not too happy about this. They hold very many reservations, particularly over minority rights, democratic backsliding, which we'll get into a bit in terms of a discussion here. These remain like the complicating factors. There is continued progress in the judicial reform, anti-corruption enforcement, and the alignment with so-called EU values, which every EU state maintains, which will be key to sustaining momentum. So the accession completion it's envisioned to be, it will be established 2030 or earlier, and that's a very unique year because we've all heard about Agenda 2030. And this is all provided the reforms stay on track and political conditions remain favorable. So, yeah, this is kind of interesting in terms of further discussion. How will, in my view, it's like how will this affect the EU, which is already strained? Like in terms of, well, even though the economy seems to be growing now, manufacturing, they're saying, we know that that's interconnected with like the whole development and push for and funding into this whole military industry that they're pushing in terms of the European defense plan. But the people, the average person, financially in terms of inflation, gas prices, electricity prices, housing costs. What about the migrant issue, which we also reported on last week? This is already creating tensions and a large divide, where we're seeing both members from the left and right taking on pretty strong positions now in terms of migration. We're going to come back to this point later because this is another topic that we have to bring up that's coming later.
We'll talk about it in a second.
But the larger point in question is the purpose of the European project. What does it stand for anymore? And what it originally was to establish peace and maintain harmony. But is this possible currently by bringing in Ukraine? I mean, I wanted to highlight some significant points here before I open it up to let Edge bring up his thoughts on this. But people forget that we had a similar situation when we brought Romania into the EU. Many were concerned that it wasn't ready. It also had a lot of issues in terms of corruption, in terms of its justice system, and also political system, which people are still qualifying and questioning. But there's another issue here, is that these two countries, particularly Romania and Ukraine, and we can show some examples here, they have been major hubs for exploitation and trafficking, even before the current Ukraine, the war going on in Ukraine. In fact, that is also a problem right now, what's going on in Ukraine, because even throughout the war, there are cases of trafficking. If you go lower here, it's very interesting. This is this is which one? Is this the OC index? I think so.
Yeah, this is the
So here, what
Organized
it says,
Crime Index.
on the left column, it's stating the human trafficking market in Ukraine continues to be pervasive, with the country acting as a source, transit, and destination point for this activity. Trafficking victims of Ukrainian origin are exploited for sex trafficking and forced labor in Ukraine, Russia, Poland, and other parts of Europe, as well as the Middle East, and a small number of foreign nationals are exploited for forced labor in Ukraine. So here we go, right? This is the first part. Now, on the other side,
and this is like the top point, like on these issues. Okay.
On the second column in relation to Romania, Romania is a major country of origin and destination for human trafficking and remains among the top 5 in the EU for the number of victims concerned. People who become involved in human trafficking rings are usually exploited in the sex industry, agriculture, construction, domestic service, hotels, or for forced begging and theft in Romania as well as other European countries. So,
my God,
my point is sustained here, where there is like this was a known fact for a long time. obviously these are two countries that have, like, very ex-Soviet or ex-communistic dictator historical background, so they were
Yes.
very impoverished. They suffered greatly, and that is part of the root of this problem. It's not the people, obviously, it's the system. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, with a lot of that, these two
Romania was
countries,
under dictatorship as
yes,
well.
these two countries have unfortunately been exploited greatly in terms of trafficking, and this problem has never been resolved. And so my point is, what will happen now? Do we believe, once, first of all, there's the whole issue of, like, international affairs here. The European Union is technically with NATO, so bringing Ukraine into the European Union is this kind of sly way of, like, saying, okay, now they're under the protection of NATO. There's the
Yeah.
other problem, which is, are we actually doing anything to assist the Ukrainian people further, or is this just going to be further damage? So I don't know. This is my point in terms of the EU. Why do we keep expanding? And we're going to reach this topic again because we just brought up about migration, right? We are not fixing the things at home. We're not fixing the issues currently in other European countries. We're just trying to bring in more problems. And this is, I don't see how this is a net benefit for not only the Ukrainian people, but for also European people in the European Union. This is my concern. Obviously, there could be arguments that could sway and say, because not every European Union country has joined the currency, like Denmark and
Yes.
I forget, Czechia.
Switzerland.
So I mean, but then we're going to
Yeah.
also we're going to see also a mass movement of people too, because that's what happened when we brought in Romania. That's what we brought in Poland. For Poland was for the better, obviously, but like with countries like Romania, I'm not sure if that's the case, because Romania is still suffering a lot of corruption, and that's the trouble. And now we're highlighting the fact of these anti-corruption laws. Now we're seeing a backpedal. I mean, can we trust this? Like, come on. This is known as a very corrupt country. It is the major hub in the European continent. No politician ever talks about that, unfortunately, because obviously now the main topic of concern, which is true, is the war that's ongoing there. But even with the war ongoing there, guess what? Trafficking hasn't stopped. In fact, there's plenty of it going on with children and stuff. So, you know, um, I don't see. Well, you go ahead. I've spoken enough.
Yeah, I'm just gonna like unload my thoughts. So basically, the conflict between like Ukraine and Russia is like the big like elephant in the room. Like what's going on? And to be honest, the whole thing had the ball rolling because Ukraine was meant to be like a neutral country without like nuclear power. And it was meant to be like a buffer zone between Russia and, let's say, the West, like Europe, America. And yeah,
NATO, basically.
and like this conflict started because Russia didn't want, let's say, a nuclear power. If Ukraine joined NATO, uh, Russia didn't want, let's say, a nuclear power on its borders. Like we don't want, let's say, another
Right.
world war. And now, well, it's weird because the States was kind of funding Ukraine with weapons, but now I think recently they paused it or something. And I think Trump said it's the EU's turn to like fund Ukraine with weapons. But like if
Yeah.
Ukraine isn't part of NATO, but it becomes part of the EU, it aligns itself with other countries within the EU who have nuclear capabilities, like France and the UK. And
I mean, the EU is a partner with
yeah, and that's like a
the
big
European Union.
risk towards all the other European countries. I mean, like it goes against the agreement. Like Ukraine shouldn't be part of, let's say, a or have like free borders with a country which has nuclear capabilities. Like here I'm
Yeah.
talking about like mass, like dangerous, catastrophic consequences, not just for particular countries, but possibly the entire world. Okay, so uh, let me talk about some other issues over here.
hmm
So, what about, let's say, the financial burden? So, If the EU expands and it brings in countries that are poorer, then all the other
Hmm.
countries would automatically be poorer because there won't be jobs.
It's going to bring it will put a burden, of course, on the market
Yeah,
in general.
and also it will
But I
take like
guess
rebuilding those countries.
their plan to subvert that is obviously in developing, the military industrial development of like through manufacturing and stuff like this. So are they thinking of perpetuating a warlike scenario, which is a never-ending thing that you are enabled then to like produce more ammunitions,
Mhm.
more arms and stuff? Because that's the only way I see this working out in the long term. Because they're not going to be producing this
Yeah.
stuff, right, to be stocked up because it's not being used, right? Or selling it to other countries
Mhm.
to instigate other conflicts. I don't know. It's what people have to
I
wonder.
also
I
think
mean, part of the reason why.
I also
Go ahead.
think that, let's say, if they brought the Ukraine into the EU, it's for companies within the EU and governments, let's say, to take advantage of Ukraine. So they'll like throw them some
Hmm.
loans to supposedly rebuild their country, but at a great
But they
cost
won't.
as well. I mean, the
Yeah.
people over there won't have money to repay it. So who's going to pay for all of this?
It's been estimated that their post-war reconstruction needs will be enormous. They're estimated in the hundreds of billions of euros, and they would likely be partially funded by EU
If not
taxpayers,
trillions,
who,
like
by
for
the way,
infrastructure and stuff.
are already burdened because
Yeah.
of the being penalized due to electricity, gas, all this other stuff. So, what is the view of most European, uh, the average Europe? God, I hate
Hmm.
using that
Yeah.
term, but the European Union citizen, or whatever. What is their view? On the surface, they're probably like, "Oh yeah, sure, it's a great idea," but
Let's
I
bring
don't think
them all
that's
our
this.
friends.
Yeah,
Let's bring them in. But there's like there are consequences to your actions,
yeah, more inflation. There would
and
be more inflation, and this would rise due to
and
the.
but also like you mentioned, like regarding crime and like labor rights and stuff like that, exploitation rings, criminal networks.
Well,
You
why
know,
isn't that
it's
like? This is what I don't get. It doesn't matter which country, any country that's supposed to join in any type of union, you know,
yeah.
sure they have to accept our values and so.
But like the only reason, let's say, EU would bring Ukraine in is so they could sell them more machinery, pharmaceuticals, vehicles, luxury goods. But those are only for the few, let's say, Ukrainian people who could afford it. I mean, sure, tech and machinery, like, I don't know, ovens and stuff would be beneficial, but at what cost? And like I mentioned before, like they would, like the EU wants to put Ukraine in debt so that Ukraine would have to repay uh, the EU and companies and countries for building all this infrastructure. So yeah, Bert, I just mentioned like some like positives of Ukraine joining the EU,
Hmm.
but in turn, it's kind of like taking advantage, and there are always like
Hmm.
kind of drawbacks to
Yeah.
things.
Well, that's
So,
what
for
people don't look
example,
at, right?
yeah, like regarding labor and also rebuilding the infrastructure for the country, like and also there's going to be an issue with housing as well, like as if there isn't one already.
Well, that's my point. This is like one of the fundamental principles. Before you can start helping out other people, maybe fix your own problems first, and then why are we
Yeah,
expanding? Why are we trying to bring in more people to join? This all feels a bit more. Just it just feels more
yeah,
like it's more like geopolitical,
like
posturing.
expansionism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and
I
and,
I
and
don't think it's.
in the past they kind of made it difficult, let's say, for countries to join the EU, but lately they're just bringing any country on board, I'm sorry to say.
I mean, at one point they were
And
considering Georgia, and don't get me wrong, but it's just like, come on now, like
yeah,
let's.
Let's get serious.
I don't know. We shouldn't. Why aren't we thinking about first ending the war before anything else? You know,
I mean,
this is
if
the
they
thing.
could, they would do it like the Eurovision Song Contest, like bring in Israel and Australia on board.
Yeah,
Yeah, I just want to say one last point is that
sure.
like in Europe, especially Western Europe, as we get older and everything, there's also like a big issue for healthcare and pension systems, like
The social net.
national insurance and stuff. And that goes for many countries: the UK, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Greece, Italy,
Yeah,
Spain, Portugal.
that are more affected in terms of the economy, like the southern states, the EU. So
Yeah,
the pigs.
and there's an issue with like getting young people like a workforce. And I don't know if this is also like an EU ploy, let's say, to get younger workforces in. But like instead
Yeah,
of if you can't fix your own countries, bringing in another country would not make it better. You know, it's just going to make it worse. Like it's
it doesn't
proven that
help.
the EU cannot manage people or situations or anything. Like this
Yeah,
is just for certain under the table deals for these politicians uh, to have interest in.